Good evening and welcome. I'm Elliot Cernell, a Palm Springs resident and a member of the board of directors of SAGE, the nation's oldest and largest organization dedicated to improving the lives of our LGBT elders. So I'm proud and excited to share with you some of the work that this remarkable organization does, impacting the lives of our community right here in my home base. I want to thank all of the people who have made this evening happen. As anyone who has produced or even participated in a virtual meeting, which at this point I'm sure is probably everybody, everyone knows this is no small feat. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us this evening. A special shout out to our friends joining us from JP Morgan Chase and Company, Union Bank, and a thank you for all your support. If you tuned in a few minutes early, I hope you enjoyed a walk down memory lane provided by the pics in some of our events of the past years. And as we also let you know in between those photos, if at any point in time you have a question or comment, please add them to the live chat. Running through tonight's program, you will hear two recurring themes. The first is one of partnership. SAGE works with peer organizations to ensure that our community elders are included, respected, served, and that the needs specific to our community are addressed. To be clear, the partners we elevate tonight are but a fraction of those with which we play well. Local partners include Equality California, the LGBT Community Center of the Desert, Open House San Francisco, the Los Angeles LGBT Center, California Commission on Aging, AGL Health, and Lavender Courtyard in Sacramento, just to name a few of those. The second theme tonight is COVID-19, SAGE's response to it, the ways the pandemic has affected existing programs, and the ways it will shape SAGE's program and services going forward. And even in this pandemic, our advocacy efforts resulted in the passage of an LGBT-friendly Older Americans Act, the only LGBT-inclusive bipartisan piece of legislation enacted during the Trump years. Tonight's program will be divided into three parts. We'll first talk about the National Equality Act and California's tremendous legislative achievement of AB 2719, which added sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression to the California Department of Aging's list of prioritized communities for programs and services, designating LGBT older people as a population of greatest social need. Next, we'll move on to a discussion of LGBT welcoming housing developments and how the values of AB 2719 extend beyond the law's specific requirements. Lastly, we'll be joined by SAGE's CEO, Michael Adams, for a conversation about what's on SAGE's horizon and get his response to questions you may have put in the chat. So as a reminder, make sure if you do have any questions to place those in the chat. So enough about me. Let's turn to the first part of our evening, which focuses on activism and advocacy and the need for legislation like the Equality Act and AB 2719. Here to share on that are SAGE's Chief Executive Officer, Michael Adams, who will be joined by Congressman Mark Takano and Betsy Butler, immediate past chair of the California Commission on Aging and executive director of the California Women's Law Center.
Thank you, Elliot. So wonderful to be here and so exciting to have so many folks joining us this evening. And I have to say that we are so lucky tonight to have not just one, but two truly amazing leaders to join us for this very timely conversation, Congressman Mark Takano and Betsy Butler. And the reason I say timely is for a couple of reasons. First, the Equality Act is in Congress now. It's the best chance in a generation to get comprehensive civil rights protections enacted at the federal level for LGBT folks. It's already been passed by the House of Representatives. Go Mark. And it's now in the Senate. And one of the things that's very important to SAGE is that there is specific language in the Equality Act that would protect LGBT plus older adults from discrimination. This conversation is also really timely because California is such a leader on LGBT aging issues. California is the first state in the country to pass a law prioritizing LGBT older people as a priority population for the state's aging programs. Since then, states like Illinois and Virginia have followed in California's footsteps. And of course, I'm referring to the great leadership shown through the bill that Elliot mentioned, AB 2719. Now, I want to start actually by talking about partnerships and talking with Congressman Takano and Betsy about partnerships in Congress. SAGE is proud to be part of the steering committee for the Freedom and Opportunity for All campaign to enact the Equality Act. In California, SAGE has worked closely with so many organizations, including Equality California to pass AB 2719 and the California Commission on Aging. So Mark, let me start with you and let me ask you a question. As you know, a big theme for tonight's program is the importance of working in partnership. So thinking about that theme in the context of the Equality Act, can you talk with us about what you see as the prospects for the Equality Act getting enacted? And how important is it that there be collaboration and cooperation in that effort among LGBT organizations, allies, et cetera? You know, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Mark.
Okay, actually, I think it looks like we have an audio problem with Congressman Takano for a moment. So Betsy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, well, let's jump over to you then, okay? And we're going to bring Congressman Takano back in a moment.
Sure.
Just as SAGE has been really proud to partner with LGBT organizations in Congress on the Equality Act, we've been equally proud with the work we've been able to do in partnership with the California Commission on Aging to improve public policies that include and support LGBT older adults. So I'd love to hear from you on, like, what do you see as the kind of benefits in that kind of partnership between an organization like SAGE and the California Commission on Aging? And in your experience as the immediate past chair, what has it been like? What's it been like to work in this collaboration?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for putting this together tonight and inviting me to join you, because it's really an honor and a pleasure. And an honor and a pleasure also when I first got to meet you from in Palm Springs at a Commission on Aging meeting. I don't even know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I'm forgetting now. But grateful for that partnership and our continuing partnership, because it really does take a village, and we all have to work together all the time. Until there's true equity for everyone, we have a lot of work to do. And as much as great things are happening both nationally and here in California, there's still just so much to do. And we, of course, have the Master Plan for Aging here in California, which really is focused on equity and inclusion. We, of course, are a very diverse state here in California, and getting more so every year. Particularly the aging community falls into that as well. I mean, obviously, if we are a majority minority state, then the aging people here are minority too, and the needs are quite diverse. And we do have to work together, and partnerships like ours. Also, we did the Elder Economic Forum in November of 2019 at the LA LGBT Center. I know your relationship with them is fabulous, but when you have partners like that, you're so blessed, because, and a shout out to Lori Jean, because she's just amazing. She created a space, or brought into space. The center was amazing before, but now it's so enriching. Yeah, and we did, in November of 2019, we did one of our Commission on Aging meetings there, and it was one of the most glorious places. That huge conference room outside with all the glass, and then they were doing, housing for elder adults. Like, this is stunning. It's not surprising, because Lori is a visionary who would create, whatever the community needs, and we need to do a lot more of that. And in partnership, right, other communities that aren't as blessed as Los Angeles to have an LA LGBT center, and other, really strong advocates, but we need to acknowledge this need. And that's what the Master Plan for Aging does too. It really has focused on equity and inclusion, and working together, we hopefully will make sure that people in California and across the country can age with dignity and in good health.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you lifted up that theme of working together. And that conference hosted by the LA Center was amazing, and incredible discussions, rich content, and to have the opportunity to be there together with our colleagues at the LA Center on the beautiful new campus, just extraordinary, just extraordinary. Hopefully, we're going to have Congressman Takano back soon. Apparently, there are some tech issues, but in the meantime, we're going to forge ahead, even though we're hoping to get that three-way conversation and that we were really excited about. But Betsy, let me ask you, I mentioned earlier, of course, California was the first state in the country to declare LGBT older adults a so-called population of greatest social needs, prioritizing our community's elders in the state's aging programs. It was the first, but not the last, right? And since California did that, Illinois has followed in California's footsteps. Virginia has followed, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. I want to ask you, as somebody who has led the California Commission on Aging, has been a leader on aging issues and inclusive aging issues for so long in California, what does it feel like to be the first state to do something so important and to see other states following? Like, how does that make you feel as a leader? Is that part of what you aspire to? And what do you think about it?
Right. Well, as much as California does lead on a lot of issues, we also do not lead on a lot of other ones. So we will highlight this one as a positive. And also because it's so important in that even prior to COVID, we knew that isolation was the #1 concern for aging adults in California and across the country, right? So then you put in COVID, and all of a sudden the isolation levels are off the charts. And as we know, older LGBTQ people are less likely, 4 times less likely to have children. They are twice as likely to live by themselves. They also, HIV positive people have very huge situations with isolation. And, being isolated and having no one around and having no way to get transportation, or just having a fear of discrimination or discriminatory behavior. And I know Sage did a study and a report on this with regard to healthcare, right? And that people are afraid to go get healthcare because they're afraid they're going to be discriminated against, or they can't afford it. Well, we know that if you don't take care of your health early on, that things are going to really mushroom. And so I'd like to think that California is on the cutting edge of a lot of these issues. Again, as I said, sometimes we are not. Sometimes we are last in a list. Don't get me started on a couple items, but I really
We've got some things we're still pushing for.
Yeah. Is that? Do I hear? Is Mark on?
No, you're good. Not yet. But okay. I can see they're trying to get him on. So, yeah, we're definitely going to get him in. Come hell or high water. But for now, you and I are going to keep talking. Yeah,
great. And so I just, it is great to live in this state. Let's be clear. We have this amazing governor who, in June of 2019 said we're doing a master plan for aging. So many stakeholders and so many meetings involved in putting together the master plan for aging. 132 initiatives came out of it in 5 areas: housing, healthcare, caregiving, affordable aging, and of course inclusion and equity to avoid isolation.
Betsy, it looks like Congressman Takano may be ready.
All right.
Mark, do we have you?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Great to have you here, Mark. Thank you so much. Thank you for powering through the tech problems with us. Let me ask you, Betsy and I have been talking about partnership and collaboration, and wanted to ask you, of course, we have the Equality Act, pending in the Senate, already through the House. Thank you so much for your leadership in the House. What do you see as the prospects for passage of the Equality Act, and how important is it going to be that our organizations and our community work together to try to make that happen?
Well, organizations like SAGE, LGBT organizations across the political, I wouldn't say spectrum, but we're going to have to partner with all sorts of people that have business before the Senate. Really, the House of Representatives is doing yeoman's work in passing transformational legislation. And unfortunately, what stands in the way is a loophole, an archaic procedure. It's the filibuster. The American people really don't care about it. They really don't. They don't, it was a procedural move that Mitch McConnell exploited to great effect against President Obama. And, we couldn't go to the people and say to them, look, Mitch McConnell is blocking legislation. They just punished, Democrats for not getting legislation done. They didn't really buy the filibuster as an excuse. The filibuster is a relic. It's a dinosaur. It's time for it to go. All the reasons for why a lot of people may be afraid of letting it go. I consider myself somewhat of an institutionalist. I don't believe in burning down, the house to get what you want. But I don't see that this is the case here. And we can. So look, I was at a rally today calling for filibuster reform, filibuster removal, filibuster, you name it. I think it is high time, and I think the fact that we are debating it so openly and that we're only down to maybe one or two senators, I think indicates that the days are numbered for the filibuster, and that I think that Senators Sinema and Manchin ultimately will not be on the wrong side of history. I know Senator Sinema and I know Senator Manchin. They don't want to be on the wrong side of history. They're not the same as like Lester Maddox riding backwards on a mule. That's not who they are.
Not at all. Not at all.
So we're going to get the Equality Act done, but it is going to take, Michael. It's going to take making the filibuster too hot to handle, and we're going to have to educate everybody, and we're going to have to link arms with immigration people. We're going to have to link arms with people who want teenagers to stop being shot at in high schools. We're going to have to link arms with people who don't want to see people being shot at the logistics centers, at FedEx sorting centers. I mean, we're going to have to link arms with people who want to make sure that everyone can get to a polling place, and that we have fair elections and that we have democracy reform. We're going to have to link arms and be partners with all of these other folks. And as Jesse Jackson, I'm going to use a Jesse Jackson image about, that we are all a kind of a quilt. But alone, our patch is not big enough.
Mark, what you're sharing is so inspiring. And I want to ask both you and Betsy about something that's making me think about. One of the things that I admire so much about each of you is how well you kind of see the connections, right, and connect the dots across issues and communities. Mark, you may recall it. You spoke at a SAGE event several years ago, and you spoke so movingly about the experience of your family when it was relocated to a Japanese internment camp Japanese American internment camp during World War II, and how that history impacts the way you see social justice issues and LGBT issues. Betsy, you're a longtime leader on women's issues, on LGBT issues, on aging issues. You both have such a broad, connected vision. And I'd love to ask each of you, starting with you, Mark, where can that connection, those connections, where can bringing that together really take us?
Well, Japanese internment, I see as a failure of political leadership. There was a lack of representation of Asian Americans and Asians in general in government. No one stood up to speak. No one stood up for them. They literally were not in the room where decisions were being made. There were very few notable courageous figures. The Governor Ralph Carr of Colorado spoke up for Japanese Americans, but he would lose his election. But nobody who was in a place to make a difference was of Asian descent, and there was a glaring lack of representation. I think we need to remember as LGBTQ people that we are on the timeline of civil rights history, that President Obama succinctly enunciated it in his second inaugural address, where he talked about Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall, and actually granted that Stonewall was on that timeline of civil rights, that David Cicilline, who is the author and lead sponsor of the Equality Act, went humbly to the Congressional Black Caucus and knew that because we were seeking to simply add a few words to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that we had to pay respect to the blood and the tears and the sweat that all were expended on behalf of that Civil Rights Act of 1964, and to know that the Supreme Court majorities that actually have extended us same-sex marriage, that this is a result of partnerships and coalitions, and that we can't forget that. Now, when same-sex marriage came to be in 2013, I was afraid that we would get so unmoored in our success that we would forget that we owed these victories to a Supreme Court majority that was made by presidents that were elected by these coalitions. But I think we see now that we can forget the lessons of Japanese American internment. We had a president who didn't even know very much about it and said, well, maybe it was a good thing. He actually said that during his campaign. I never thought I'd see the day that we would see a presidential candidate who was, that he was a serious contender, that he would be so disconnected and ignorant of history. And we can see the need as a community, as an LGBT community, to have the responsibility to connect with that history, to see the linkage that we have to other movements, that their priorities are our priorities. We need to care about the children being separated from their families at the border. That's our issue, because that's the coalition. These are the folks that we have to build a majority with, and who we have built a majority with. That's the House of Representatives majority that got us the Equality Act over that's how we built our majority. We built it with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We built it with the Congressional Black Caucus. We built it with the unprecedented number of women who got elected. So let's remember that we are more than what we are, and that's only because we recognize the struggles that others have had to engage in.
Mark, thank you so much for that. And Betsy, this is such an inspiring conversation. I want to bring this back to you. Something that Congressman Decano just said really struck with me. The notion of what happens when people aren't at the table, right? How that can so often be the source of marginalization, discrimination. It makes me think about SAGE's motto for LGBT older folks: we refuse to be invisible. We must be at the table. I want to ask you, you're the head of the California Women's Law Center. You've been a leader on women's issues and so many issues for so long. Where does that take your mind in thinking about the importance of having elders at the table, of having women at the table, of having people of color, immigrants at the table?
Well, it goes back to what Mark was saying. It's all about leadership, right? And who do you have in leadership? And the congressman from Colorado did the right thing. If you're a leader, sometimes it's not about getting reelected. Believe me, it's about doing the right thing. And I went to to college in the early 80s, right? So in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, and we had quote leaders in the White House who for a decade did nothing, right? And so I was living that. And anytime I hear the name Bush, you know, I just, either of them, right? I just learned from my young adulthood that there isn't fairness. And then as I have aged, I've learned about gender inequity. And, you know, we do a lot of work with the Williams Institute because gender discrimination is gender discrimination. And until and unless we're all treated fairly, you know, we have work to do, which is what I'd said earlier, Mark, when you weren't on. And, you know, I've also been on the board of Equality California for, I think, 19 years now. So when I got on, you know, in the early 2000s with Shannon Minter and, you know, my husband, John Duran, got me on, and Jeff Coors and Jody Cole and all these amazing people, you know, my privilege to know them, to work with them, to fight for marriage, even though if you remember in California, the gay community wasn't thrilled about that marriage discussion going forward, Gavin. And then we got it, and then we lost it, and then we got it again. And I think, and I say this all the time, when we first got marriage, I said to my friends, I said, this is just like Roe v. Wade. This is just like abortion, right? You have it now, and you're likely going to have to fight for it. And that is how this has turned out, both for choice, and you look at what's happening. You know, the fact is, it's going to be an inculcation process that is going to be very long. I mean, we're in the middle of it until we can get people who really understand that everyone should be treated fairly. And so, you know, it has been my honor to meet people like Michael and know people like Mark and work with all these organizations who are trying to make, you know, life fair for everyone and equitable. So, you know, we just have to keep working together.
I want to pick up, Betsy, on something that you just shared. First of all, so great lifting up Equality California, amazing organization, and partner with SAGE on this legislation in California. The Williams Institute, which was the first organization to document the connection between poverty and LGBT older people, yes, finding that older lesbians are twice as likely to age in poverty as older Americans in general, right? Such incredible advocates, and National Center for Lesbian Rights, of course, another really, really incredible leader, partner with SAGE. We did an amazing project together on legal rights for LGBT older adults. So we have all these advocates, and one thing I'd love to get both of your advice about is I can say, and spending a lot of time talking with peers and other organizations, Shannon Minter from National Center for Lesbian Rights and so many other folks, is that a lot of us work really hard, right, to get laws passed, whether it's AB 2719 in California, or let's say we are going to get the Equality Act passed. We work hard to get it passed. And then sometimes it can seem frustrating because we don't always see the change on the ground that we expect to see from the law's passage, right? And we have to be reminded over and over again that passing the law is the first step, right? And then there's enforcement, implementation. So I'd love to ask both of you, starting with you, Mark, what advice would you give us as advocates, SAGE as an organization, all of our advocate peers, and how to think about what happens after we win the great victory and pass the law? What comes next?
Well, as you said, you already kind of outlined it: implementation and oversight. So there's a role for legislative bodies after a law has been passed into law, signed into law. The legislative committees that have oversight need to conduct hearings. They need to work with organizations like SAGE. Organizations like SAGE play a huge role in terms of reporting back the shortcomings of implementation, the shortcomings of it. Sometimes SAGE will have to, groups like SAGE will have to enter into lawsuits. They'll have to find plaintiffs. Hopefully we've designed the laws so that there are remedies. And sometimes those remedies are judicial remedies. And you're going to have to be involved in ensuring that whatever remedy there is in the law that you're finding and taking up the cause of key plaintiffs. But there's still a need also for groups like SAGE to be part of the structural accountability. And what I mean by that is you need to be there in touch with the people that you represent and serve, in this case, LGBT elders. And if they're being treated unfairly, you need to be able to kind of constantly assess and survey what's happening. And those elders and their families need to know that they can turn to organizations like SAGE. They need to know you exist. And like, who are they going to call? Who are they going to call that is going to be their advocate? So I'm the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee. I can tell you that we've been working on ways to deal with sexual harassment at the VA. Women veterans don't want to go to the VA to get their care there. And it may be the only healthcare quality healthcare that they are eligible for, but yet they may be subjected to harassment from staff as well as other veterans. We've now passed a law that says that we're going to crack down on this. But changing the culture of an entire institution is a lot more work. It's implementation and oversight. And I cite this as an example of, even when we pass laws which give people rights, LGBT elders rights, it's still a lot to change the culture. It's not as if nursing homes and long-term care facilities and senior housing complexes are suddenly going to have enlightened people running them and say, "Hey, you're welcome." Even with the law on our side, you're still going to need a SAGE to be an advocate and an organizer.
Mark, thank you so much for that. And Betsy, I'm getting an indication that we're just about out of time. I feel like this conversation is just getting started. I'd love for us to spend the whole night talking, but we're going to have to move on a moment. So Betsy, I want to give you the last word here, the last word of wisdom. What advice would you give SAGE, would you give our elders in terms of how to keep pushing forward and creating the equality and equity we need?
Yeah, just, everyone kind of needs to be patient when you're getting legislation done. State legislation in California and Congress is done very differently, but in California, you can do broad sweeping changes. Take the ACA. Okay, that's a huge piece of legislation. It's not perfect. You could try to dot all your I's and cross your T's. There's really no way. The same is true when we passed huge environmental legislation here. The MPA, the Master Plan for Aging, is going to be implemented over a decade. So hopefully we can get that all right. But people have to understand that it's something that you can't always get everything you want, and it's a process that takes time sometimes to make big change. People don't like change all that much, so just keep trying, just keep moving a step or two ahead, incrementally. Don't think you're going to get it all at once, but just keep going.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Representative Takano. You were such amazing change makers, and we are so lucky to have you on our side. And thank you for giving us some of your precious time tonight. Really grateful.
Thank you.
This conversation obviously could have gone on much longer, but we have incredible remainder of the program in store for you. So now I'd like to introduce Sydney Kopp-Richardson, SAGE's Director of the National LGBT Elder Housing Initiative, for a conversation with Roberto Jimenez, who is CEO of Mutual Housing California and the sponsor of Sacramento's Lavender Courtyard. And they're going to speak about how SAGE and Mutual Housing and many other organizations are working together to create and promote visionary and innovative housing options for LGBT older folks in California. So Sydney, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Can everybody hear me all right? So good evening. California is close to my heart. I worked in downtown LA in homeless services, and I'm really honored to be here. I want to give a shout out to Gary and Henry, who I saw in Long Beach, are here. Again, my name's Sydney. I'm the director of SAGE's National LGBT Elder Housing Initiative, also known as the NHI. We work to create and support a continuum of housing interventions for LGBT elders across the country. So we have built housing, we conduct technical assistance, we do trainings and advocacy, and we host annual housing symposiums. And in the next fall, we're going to be hosting our first annual symposium in partnership with Open House in San Francisco, which is really exciting, focusing more deeply on the clinical needs of LGBT elders as we age in housing. So more to come on that. One of the groups we're honored to be in partnership with is Mutual Housing California. And here is CEO Roberto Jimenez. Mutual Housing develops, operates, and advocates for sustainable housing that builds strong communities through resident participation and leadership development. And their newest project is Lavender Courtyard. It's one I'm so excited about. And Roberto and I have had such powerful conversations about collectively building community in this work. So Roberto, welcome. Can you explain a little bit about your work in Sacramento? What is it about your work that is unique and innovative and really moving the needle in how we develop and dream about housing?
Mutual Housing's been around for over 30 years, going on 35 years in the Sacramento region, and it's a very community-based organization that over those years has not lost touch with its roots. For example, 51% of our board is comprised of residents who live in our housing, and we do that intentionally so we can stay in close touch with the needs of people living in our housing and diverse types of housing.
That's great. So we're talking about bills and policies. Bills create policies, but they also help shift culture and norms, right? So how does this prioritization of LGBT elders as a community of greatest social need reflect the relevance and the impact and the direction of our work? Can you speak a little bit about culture shift and intersectionality, which we've talked a lot about, and how that needs to inform our work in housing?
Yeah, culture shift is a fascinating area. Sometimes it comes from the ground up, say with our board of directors. Sometimes we're leading in these initiatives, and sometimes we're actually following on them. And sometimes when pieces of legislation like this happen, they create opportunities. This piece of legislation, 2719, creates a great opportunity for us to move in and talk further and organize people around these issues. And the intersectionality here in Sacramento, which is one of the most diverse cities in the country, it's in the top 10. It's also a rural community, and that's really amazing about it. To be building LGBT elder housing in a rural-facing community is a really unusual thing. The diversity of Sacramento is such that, the number of different populations represented is huge. Being an LGBT person, being bisexual and Latino, being Black and lesbian, being a gay white male, they all bring different experiences, right? And they all come from diverse places with diverse experiences, and particularly with diverse experiences of oppression. And Mutual Housing and Lavender Courtyard is a place where those people get to come together and work on those issues together, or just find a safe place to live.
Absolutely. And I know, yeah, we've talked, about your history doing, different types of housing development, which I think is such an asset that you bring, in terms of housing for farm workers and looking at the diversity of the needs of elders in Sacramento and how we can build collectivity amongst communities that at times, might be living in different areas and in different ways, but we want to help build collectively. So you've had to build this work for years. That requires time. It requires relationship building and political building. So it's an ongoing process, right? Can you talk a little bit about our work together and any impact the NHI has had on Mutual Housing or Lavender Courtyard?
Yeah, the Lavender Courtyard, it has been in the process for 6 years at this point. On on a fast-moving housing development project would be 2 years. So 6 years is long, but not extremely long. On the front end, we had to do a lot of organizing. There was opposition to this housing on the front end. And I won't say that was huge opposition, but it absolutely took organizing and building support for it. And then NHI was there with data, which really helped us frame our own thinking and then organize people around that. And then doing the advocacy, we built great support. And at this point, the city council in particular has cheered us on. They put money up for it. And Sage has also helped us doing fundraising around those efforts as well to build the project.
That's great. And I know we've been in conversation too about, just different types of training and cultural competency and how important that is across the board for development of this type of housing. So you talked a bit about this. Is there anything else you want to share about where you're at today and how, Lavender Courtyard is panning out and reflects the needs and represents the greater population of the communities in Sacramento?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on the training aspect that you delivered through SAGE. While we have the desire in our organization to serve diverse populations, and in this particular project we're very committed to, that doesn't in and of itself give people the skills to interact and communicate and show the kind of sensitivity and at the very least the ability to not inadvertently offend in the process and further alienate people. And so the training that we've received, while we're currently focusing that training on the staff who will be working in those communities directly, the training is also intended for our broader organization, so building more awareness and diversifying our skill sets. And SAGE has been really helpful in that part of it.
Great. Well, thank you. I guess lastly, I'd love to ask, and I know you and I can talk for hours about issues of equity in this work, but what would your ideal dream project be aspirationally? Speak to where you and your team are going, what needs to happen along the way. Where do you want to be?
Yeah, I think that this project, Lavender Courtyard, has really opened our eyes to the possibilities of serving some of the populations, the various populations most in need. It's been a 10-year dream of mine to be able to build a project like this. And while I didn't do the initial work on it, this gave me the opportunity to do it. There are two types of projects I and we would really like to start working on. One is LGBT youth focused housing, right? And that's going to happen. The next is reentry from incarceration housing. So Lavender Courtyard has influenced our sense of possibility about really doing really broad and diverse and deep serving work.
Well, thank you so much, Roberto. I just love talking to you about the ways that our work connects around deep vulnerability across difference and how important it is. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, for sharing your time. If folks want to learn more, please check out Lavender Courtyard's profile in our primer, which is available on SAGE's website. Mutual housing is one of a number of partnerships SAGE engages with throughout California and nationally to create and secure housing opportunities for LGBT elders. I mentioned the phenomenal open house. We work so much with the Los Angeles LGBT Center and their amazing housing projects. We provided TA to small groups looking to develop in this state, including Long Beach, who I shouted out, we saw in the house. And we're working with new groups across the country who look to folks like Mutual Housing for replicable models to do accountable, equity-based housing development. So I really just want to thank you so much for being here this evening and sharing your time with us.
Okay, thank you, Sydney, and thank you, Roberto. It's really great to have that insight into how SAGE and organizations like Mutual Housing California are working together to create so many more welcoming housing options for LGBT plus older folks. Now, I'm honored to be joined by Sage Board of Directors member and Los Angeles resident and community leader, Jeffrey Erdman. And so if we've got Jeffrey, it's great to see you. So happy to be sharing the screen with you. And I want to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Michael. And I wanted to say thank you to our friend Betsy Butler and Congressman Takano for that insightful discussion. So interesting. And of course, thank you to Sydney and Roberto for really bringing home, literally, the importance of inclusive and accepting housing for LGBT elders. It's really, really important. Now, Michael, I wanted to chat a little bit more about the omnipresent COVID pandemic. It seems to me that the pandemic has brought permanent change to how services are provided by nonprofits. Certainly in navigating the pandemic, SAGE has had to make changes to its own services and programs. And despite the availability of the vaccine, which is going to bring some normality, I think, to people's lives, I'm interested to know what you think are the lasting takeaways from the pandemic. How will SAGE's work return to the way things were before this all started? And what might look permanently different?
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, we certainly hope some things will return to the way they were before. You know, SAGE and our affiliate programs across the country. We have 30 affiliates in 22 states. One of the really rich aspects of our work are the in-person programs and services and opportunities for elders to come together in community. And we certainly hope that we'll be able to bring those in-person opportunities and services programs back. And at the same time, there are many things that will never go back to the way they were and shouldn't, right? We were forced really to pivot on a dime, all of those in-person programs and services into virtual programs, things that could be made available online for folks because it wasn't safe to come together. And while we hope it soon will be safe to come together, the reality is that it's a tremendous opportunity to have online programs that can reach an incredible cross-section of elders in our community all across the country. So for example, elders in rural areas who would never be able to access a SAGE program or an LGBT plus community center. People of color who are in our community and are elders who may need and want that really special community they can find with other BIPOC folks and transgender and gender non-binary older folks. There are so many opportunities for what we can do virtually. So that's going to be something that's really going to stick, I think, in our programs. But I'd also lift it up a little larger. I think one of the things that's happened in this pandemic is that older folks in our community really were at the epicenter of this pandemic, not only because of their age, but also because of health conditions that made them more vulnerable, and because so many of our elders are very isolated and live with such thin support networks, right? So they were necessarily the center of attention in this pandemic. But frankly, it shouldn't take a pandemic for elders to be at the center of our community's focus, right? That should be always, and I think that's going to change, and that is changing. I think that's why, for the very first time, SAGE is on the steering committee to get the Equality Act passed in Congress, bringing our elders' voice right into the middle of that. That wasn't happening before the pandemic. And just in the early stages of the pandemic, we actually got a piece of legislation through Congress to support LGBT older folks. It was the only pro-LGBT legislation that made it through Congress during the Trump years, right? So these kinds of big picture changes of moving elder needs from the margins to the centers, I think that's here for good. I hope it's here for good.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, SAGE's partnership with peer organizations to do that really important work, and particularly to promote the enactment of the Equality Act, I think is certainly one way that SAGE is having a national impact. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how SAGE's national advocacy work, what SAGE is doing on a national basis in their advocacy work, and the relationships it's having with other partner organizations.
Sure. I mean, it's really wonderful to see some of the progress we've been able to make in terms of changing federal laws, even in difficult times, right? Even during hostile political times. And And again, a lot of that has been through collaboration and partnership. We're really proud to have been one of the founding members of something called the Diverse Elders Coalition, which is a national coalition of SAGE and 5 people of color national aging organizations. And we do a lot of work together. We've been able to make a lot of progress together. We're actually working together right now in tandem on the Biden infrastructure initiative to make sure that brings some equity and some access for elders from diverse communities. And then on the Equality Act itself, as I mentioned, we have joined together with 15 other national organizations, both LGBT and allied organizations, to together be part of the Freedom and Fairness for All campaign to get the Equality Act passed. And that's been an incredible collective effort that's really just starting. One of the things that's interesting in that regard, and one of the big things we're going to be needing to navigate, is the push on the part of some religious organizations, especially conservative religious organizations, for big exemptions. You know, that if we enact an Equality Act, so the argument goes, that religious organizations, even if they're federally funded, should be exempted from these anti-discrimination protections. We've got a big problem with that at SAGE because faith-based organizations are major providers of elder care in this country. They receive lots of federal money to provide that care, and they should be providing it to our community just like they provide it to everybody else. But, you know, at the same time, you know, when Congressman Takano was talking earlier about culture change, we also do a lot of work. We have a national training program, SAGE Care, and that training program is doing a lot of training and culture change work with faith-based organizations working collaboratively, right, to try to increase and improve services for elders in our community. So it's a very it's a big body of work SAGE is engaged in on the advocacy side, on the training side, and we're making some good progress.
Yeah, SAGE has its hands in so many areas, and you in particular, I know we haven't talked about the fact that you're the chair of the board of the American Society on Aging, one of the most diverse organizations of professionals working on Aging America, an organization that advances knowledge for the people working with and on behalf of older adults. And I can't imagine a better person to lead that board than you, making sure that LGBT elders are front and center, or at least at the table, as you discussed with Representative Takano, in the work that's being done on behalf of elder Americans. And I just think that coalition work is really, really important, that working in the broader community is really important. But I know we're running short of time, and I wanted to just take a moment to kind of bring it back to California a little bit and talk about the fact that, Southern California and the Palm Springs area in particular has been kind of a haven for the growing population of older adults living with HIV. And, many HIV positive people have migrated to this area from all around the country. And I was just wanted to maybe take a moment before we close for you to talk a little bit about the HIV and Aging Policy Action Coalition that was launched by SAGE, and generally what SAGE is doing in particular for this very vulnerable part of the population.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I'm so glad that you raised that issue. It's such an important part of SAGE's work. The reality is that, way more than half the people who are aging when living in this country with HIV are older than 50. Large numbers of SAGE's constituents are living with HIV and impacted by HIV. So HIV and aging just organically is a really important issue in our work. That's why we're actually super, super pleased that we have partnered with Gilead on Gilead's HIV Age Positively campaign. And through that campaign, Gilead is supporting the HIV and Aging Policy Coalition, or HAPAC, that you referenced. And that's a coalition that SAGE coordinates. It includes 16 organizations across the country, organizations and advocates, including amazing folks in California, Tess Anderson in San Francisco, a transgender losses center, based in Oakland, and we're doing some really amazing work together in California. The big focus right now is to convince the state legislature to enact a piece of legislation. It's SB 258 that would accomplish with older folks living with HIV what we've accomplished for LGBT older adults, meaning to have HIV folks living with HIV who are 50 and older be designated as a population of greatest social needs, so a priority population in aging programs. That would be a huge, huge breakthrough. And we've got great partners, again, Equality California, the LA LGBT Center, AIDS Project Los Angeles, the ACLU. This is a real team effort. And that bill has momentum, and we're optimistic that we can move it forward. And that's indicative of what this coalition is doing across the country. You know, in different jurisdictions, in different places, it's focused on different things. In Puerto Rico, for example, SAGE Puerto Rico is one of the coalition members, and there the focus is on an island-wide needs assessment of folks who are 50 and older living with HIV in Puerto Rico. In New Orleans, our New Orleans coalition member has worked with us to create a toolkit so that older folks living with HIV know how to get involved in white planning councils and make sure that older people's issues are being paid attention to, right? So the strategies are crafted differently in different parts of the country depending on what they need. But in California, the work is really exciting, really intense, and it's really about ensuring that older folks living with HIV are a priority in the state's aging programs.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that, Michael. That I really appreciate that insight. I think our audience will really be pleased to know what we're doing in California in particular. And just thank you for everything that you do. I know you're stretched thin, but you do a lot, and you do a lot for us, and I really, really appreciate it. Well, I know we're getting close to closing, so I want to say that I hope that the discussion today has given you all a better understanding of how SAGE's work locally and nationally impacts our community in very direct ways, and has affirmed why this tremendous organization has been the focus of so much of my time and my energy and passion for so many years now. SAGE work pays back the efforts of our elders who have borne the brunt of much of our community's struggle for equality, pressing into prejudice, insisting that our lives deserve inclusion and respect. It also pays forward the legacy that these pioneers leave for us, a legacy of community, of partnership, and of persistence. If you, like me, have heard something that's touched you or inspired you, or if you saw some way that our work is benefiting you or those you love, then please support our work by making a contribution to our SAGE Strong Resiliency Fund. This fund was created recently to support SAGE and its resources and provide the resources that are needed to respond quickly and powerfully to the COVID-19 pandemic, and frankly, whatever else the future may bring for us. To support our work, just go online to sageusa.org/SageStrong. You can make a donation there and support our work in any level. It'll all be appreciated. And of course, we thank all of those who have already contributed to our SAGE Strong Resiliency Fund. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated tonight and to all of you who attended. Thank you and have a good night.